Good morning. Happy Resurrection Sunday. Hope everybody's doing all right today. I want to thank Shelby. Shelby Roy in here? Yeah, I saw him this morning, I believe. I want to thank him for filling in for me last week. My family and I were doing some traveling, and it's always nice when... What did you all do last week? Did you all go through the honor and shame challenges last week? Good. I hope you found that useful. We spent 3 weeks on honor and shame. And remember that culture is all through the Bible, so you can, anything that you've learned from that honor and shame culture can be overlaid over the entire Bible, because that whole concept of honor, shame, it's prevalent throughout, and it really helps you understand that culture in a more engaging way. I want to begin this morning by just expressing the condolences to the Virgil Prophet family. But if you're going to pass, what a beautiful weekend to do it on. And I mean that in all seriousness, is because from here on, his family will always remember Resurrection Sunday as the day before that their father passed. And when you're a Christian and you lose a loved one, the thing that you look forward to most is seeing them again. And I would suggest that when you believe in Christ, when you believe in his resurrection, that he conquered death, that's where everything revolves around that, does it not? Paul says, if you don't believe in resurrection, there's nothing left for us. But when you believe in the resurrection, it provides an amazing amount of comfort. It provides an amazing amount of things to look forward to. And to know that we will see Virgil again, walking next time. We may not recognize him without that wheelchair, but he will be walking next time we see him. And I think that is an amazing thought. The other thing for human beings is, I remember when my grandfather passed away. He was probably the closest person that ever passed away to me in my life. And I remember I was at college and I got the call. I was about 300 miles away, and I got the call early in the morning that he had passed in the night. And I'll never forget hanging up the phone with my mom and life just continuing. Boy, I just longed for life to stop for just a few minutes. But classes went on. Cars were still going up and down the street. I was kind of walking numb. And you all have been there, I'm sure. And so this morning, for about 30 seconds, in honor of him and in honor of Christ, I'd just like to stop for about 30 seconds and let's reflect on Christ, the resurrection, and being able to put that in light of Virgil's passing. Thank you. In light of it being Resurrection Sunday, I wanted to take you on a little bit of a tour, kind of come back off the academics, so to speak, of Matthew, but yet still engage you in Matthew, but kind of give you a tour of some of the places in Israel that are so key to the resurrection in the life of Christ. And I'll take you to several different places. Some of you may not know the place where Jesus was crucified, or where they think he was crucified, and some of the history behind it. So I'm going to take you to those places. And really what I'm going to do is pick up in Matthew 21. If you want to follow along in there and kind of read as we go, we can't cover 21 through 28, no way in one day. But what we can do is give you a high-level overview and give you a pictorial view of what's happening in the life of Jesus at this time, and take you to some of those places today, what they look like, and some of the way the world sees Jerusalem and the places that Jesus lived, died, and so on. The first, 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 the fir map that we have here is very, very key. We see the triumphal entry beginning in verse 21. And as they approached Jerusalem and came to Bethphage, stop. That's the first thing. I know that we just barely got started into verse 21, but that tells you a lot right there. If you are Jewish, you know what Bethphage is. Most of us in this culture don't know what Bethphage means. Most of us have never focused on it. It's just a place. But it's not just what the place is, it's what the place means. It's the history behind the place. It's the place that has context in all of Jewish history. Bethphage is the border town. If you want to go right to the border of Jerusalem, you would go to Bethphage. It was known as the border town. Beth, anytime, let's see if you've learned. Remember what the word Beth means? Anytime you see the word Beth as a part of a word in Hebrew, it always means what? Do you remember? House. Very good. You remembered that. House. So, Beth means house, house of. Phage means, this will be easy for you to remember, house of unripe figs. Okay? House of unripe figs. Now, what does that have to do with the story? Well, to a Jew, and you go all the way back to the story of, and this is this is the way the Jews thought about it. It's not in our text. This is somewhat of a foreign thought to us. But as you go all the way back to Genesis and you look at the fall of man, what did Eve eat? The fruit. Now, we don't know what that fruit is, and we always do a good job of saying we don't know what that fruit was. The Jews know what they say. They know what the fruit was. They say it was a fig. Now, you can debate that all day long, but to them, they thought that it was a fig. And so when you have a fig, was always a symbol. If you go back to Jeremiah, if you go back to Joel, I could share with you places where the fig tree is a symbol of Israel's leadership and a symbol of their overall prosperity and their obedience to God. So if you had fruit of the fig tree, if I said that if you sat under your own vine and you sat under your own fig tree, that doesn't mean you're just sitting under the fig tree. It means that you're prosperous. It meant that God has blessed you. It meant that you had been obedient to God, that He had sent rain, that He had provided and made provision for you and your family and the whole nation. That's what that would mean. And if your fig tree was dead, if your fig tree was not bearing any fruit, if your fig tree was good for nothing but cutting down and throwing into the fire, then that would correlate to your obedience. It would correlate to your spiritual state. It's a metaphor.
Why Eve's disobedience in taking the fruit? If you're saying obedience, it shows obedience in their culture.
Good question. So, they thought that the fig tree, in this case, was there, and it was one of the things that tempted Eve. Okay? Good question. It was one of the things that tempted Eve. So, this is one of the two places in the Jerusalem area that the Sanhedrin would meet. One of the two places. So, why would the Sanhedrin meet in a place of unripe figs? Think about it that way. Why would the Sanhedrin meet in a place of unripe figs? And this is just the way they thought about it. It may be foreign to you, and it is foreign to me as well. But why would they do that? Knowledge of good and evil, and they don't want to go someplace where they would be tempted. It was kind of like politicians getting out of Frankfurt and going, say, to Lake Barkley and having a retreat because they didn't want all the influence of special interest in Frankfurt. That's what I'm saying. So when they would come out, they would go to the place of unripe figs because the fig, to them, in that case, the fruit represented something so good that it would be tempting to them to be able to do something, and it goes back to the fall. Nevertheless, the fig tree is still a symbol of prosperity. It's a symbol of as well as the grape, olives, things of that nature. All are very metaphorical, if you will, in the East. Remember, God doesn't describe, if we, remember back many Sundays ago, I asked you, as a Westerner, how would you describe God? And I asked you to raise your hands, and I bet you if I did it again today and took the time to do it, you would say the same things. If I said, name one word that describes God, you might say, all-powerful, loving, omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent. Now, when you close your eyes, and go ahead and do that just for a second, close your eyes, and what comes to your mind when we say omniscient, omnipresent, all-powerful? If you open your eyes, nothing probably. You're having a hard time picturing anything with that. That's called abstract. That's called thinking in the abstract. You've got all these words that are supposed to mean something, and it has to go through all this thought and all this intellect to be able to define what those words mean. That's a very, very Greek way of thinking. We love our bullet lists. We love our words. We love to describe things in great detail, but that's not how an Easterner in the Bible would necessarily describe God. It's not a wrong way to describe God, but now close your eyes and let me tell you how, or let me demonstrate for you how an Easterner would describe God. God is bread, cold water, living water, running water. God is shade. God is a father. God is provision in the olive tree. You see there? It's very different, isn't it? Those are called concrete thoughts. Those things put it in a rock. God is your Masada, your fortress. You go through Psalms and you'll see that over and over. You'll see God is your deliverer. All those things. And so when we look and we see these things, we see the metaphors coming through very, very deeply in Jewish thought. They're all over the place. That's why you look at the Song of Psalms, or the Song of Solomon. It's poetry. If you look at the Psalms, it's poetry. It's very vivid. Has a deer pants for the water, so my soul longs after you. You remember those verses from the Psalms? He could have just said, so my soul longs after you, Lord, but that would be, the soul longs? What does that mean? That's abstract. But if you say, that has the deer pants for it, that's concrete. You get it. Especially if you've been to the Middle East and you see those deer, those ibex, coming and hanging out all around the water. You see that. So, what we have here is Jesus comes to Bethphage. It was a place where if you're going to be king and you're going to come into the city, that's where you do it. And if you go through the Bible in Jewish thought as well, you always see God coming from the east. As a matter of fact, if you see when you could go back many times to the Old Testament, and you can see, for example, when the Israelites passed through the Red Sea, the waters parted, and then a wind from the east came. Moses, when he camped next to the tabernacle, he camped just east. And anytime he came into the tabernacle, he would come, or the tent of meeting, he would come in from the east. God always comes, that direction is from the east. I don't know where that comes from, other maybe our sun rises in the east, sets in the west. It's you could think a lot about that, but nevertheless we see that. And so when God comes into Israel on Palm Sunday at that triumphal entry, he naturally comes from the east. And he comes from Bethphage. And when he gets that donkey, remember that? He gets a donkey that's never been ridden before, and he starts there. That is messianic. Just to start. If he would have started in Jerusalem, wouldn't count. A Messiah was going to come from the outskirts and come into Jerusalem, and that's where it all started. Bethphage was also a Sabbath day's journey. It was key in measurement of how you could comply with the law. So when we say a Sabbath day's journey, as a matter of fact, if you go to Israeli villages today, in Israel, you will often see these things on telephone poles. They look like wires. They look like phone lines, but they're just cables. And they go all around the city. And I'm like, what are those things? Well, those are the Sabbath day journey markers, that you can't walk past those and still consider yourself not working on the Sabbath. Somebody was telling me a few days ago, or last couple weeks ago, about the Sabbath elevators in Israel. When you go to Israel, it really drives Westerner nuts, because you walk into the elevator and you stand there and the door doesn't close. And you're like, what's going on? and you hit the button, and you keep hitting the button like Westerners do, and the door does not shut. And you're about ready to call to the man, and as soon as you're about ready to call to complain about the elevator not closing its door, the door closes. And it goes to the next floor. Doors open, everybody gets out, and you sit there. And you're like, what's the deal? So you shut the door, typical Westerner, close, doesn't close. As soon as you're about ready to call the man, doors close. Go to the third floor, same thing happens again. Little did you know, to just read the sign, it says you're on the Sabbath elevator. It would be against the Sabbath day rules to be able to press the buttons. That's work. So when you get into the elevator does all the work for you. You just have to wait a little longer. Does that make sense? So if you ever go to Israel and you go in on the Sabbath, you will run into a Sabbath day elevator. And does it cause a backup at the elevator? Yes, it does. I have taken the steps more than once to the fourth floor or higher with my big bags to ensure I avoid the Sabbath day elevator. Nevertheless, Bethphage was that marker, that place. Now we all know what Bethany means, right? Bethany's where Lazarus lived, and that's where that resurrection happened, and then we see Jesus then coming in there. Bethany, by the way, don't ever tell our friends at any type of church called Bethany, because Bethany means the house. Beth, remember? Beth, the house of agony. So if you go to the Bethany Baptist Church or something like that, tell them that we're in the church of agony. They'll get a kick out of that. Probably a former leper colony, but that's for another phase. So Jesus comes in, and he walks right here to the Mount of Olives, and he makes his way down. Now today, this path, if you go to Israel, we can still walk on that path. That path has been there for centuries. It's still there, and it goes right through the middle of a cemetery. As a matter of fact, as you walk down this hill, most of all this today is a cemetery. And as you walk down, as you get into this area right here, a big wall starts. If you look at it on Google Earth, if you look at pictures, you see these really big walls. And what those walls are for is to keep you pure. Because if you're a Jew and you're walking down the hill, you cannot be in the presence of dead bodies. So they keep that big partition there to ensure that you aren't unclean. It really blocks your view because all you have is something about the size of probably this pew width, and that's the trail down. It's blacktop today. Still beautiful nonetheless.
How old are the graves in that cemetery?
Old, really? Quite a few, yeah. As a matter of fact, some of the oldest pictures that you see, now we only have pictures going back a century or 19th century, mid-19th century, a little before that. So you still see lots of graves up there even in that period. Now you do see less development in the Kidron, but you see fewer roads, you see it being a little bit more rustic. And that helps. I've seen pictures that are really old, like from the mid-1800s, and it kind of takes you back a little bit to be able to kind of maybe understand a little bit more what it would be like. Today, when you're standing on the Mount of Olives and you're looking down into the Kidron, you're looking at a major thoroughfare. You're looking at a lot of gardens, obviously all the cemeteries, and I don't even think you can really see the Kidron Brook very well, if at all. It may have just gone away and they have it underground or something. But
is it developed through there? I mean, would there be gas stations?
Outside of that, yes, yeah. Outside of that, yeah. That area is very difficult. If you're going to dig, you're not going to dig a gas station in there, because that is all prime archaeological space. But if you go out a little ways, yes, there's going to. I mean, it's just like anything else. The old city. Now we'll get to that in a minute. Yes, it is developed. Now today, if you go down in the streets of Jerusalem, it looks just like this. So if you're looking at, this is probably a decent depiction. I mean, I really have a critical eye, and I looked at this and I was like, what could I say about this picture that wouldn't be accurate? And I don't see anything. The palm leaves, the streets are about that wide. So when you picture Jesus coming into the triumphal entry, at least going through some of these places, it would be similar to that. It is some of you have been there, know. Now some places it widens out, obviously. But in other places, especially when you get into the city, it's very, very slim corridors. People would have been waving the palm branches. Now, why wave palm branches? Yelling Hoshiana, Hoshiana, save us in Hebrew. Why would he say that? Well, the palm branch to us was like to them was like the stars and stripes to us. When you wave that American flag, there's a lot of pride behind that, not a lot of national pride. And they would have been waving those palm branches also because it's part of what you wave at the major festivals. So if I think especially around Sukkot, or what we would call the Feast of Tabernacles, they were commanded to create something called a lulav. You've ever heard of a lulav? A lulav is essentially a palm, part myrtle, part willow, and one other that I'm not thinking of, and a citrog, a lemon, like a grapefruit. And you would get all these together because there again, that's a metaphor of covering. It's a metaphor for provision. And they would come in, and you'd have a couple 100,000 people, if not more, in the temple waving their lulavs in the temple. And the palm would have been a part of that. The palm leaf would have been just like to wave those before the Lord. So that was something that they were commanded to do in the temple worship. And as they came in, they would have adopted those palm branches as national symbols. As a matter of fact, if you go to Israel today, I think on their coins you still see the palm leaves, the palm branches on there. It's a symbol, kind of like we have the eagle. You would have the palm branch for the Israeli, or the menorah today. The menorah is obviously huge, but menorah, palm branch, still a part of that culture. So they were waving these in front of, and throwing them on the ground so he could walk. It was a symbol of honor, and they were excited. Now there's several. One of the Gospels says that Jesus wept as he came into the city because he could see that the people were looking for a military leader. They were looking for somebody who was going to come and overthrow the Romans. And he could see that the people did not fully understand. No one understood the full scope and the way he was going to go about changing the world. They didn't understand his plan of redemption. So today, if Jesus probably would have entered through the gate that's below this one. Today, this is called the Eastern Gate. If you're looking in the Kidron, we're standing in the Kidron Valley here, looking up. This is a Muslim cemetery. And the gate that Jesus would have walked through is actually below this one, so it's down here. All this that you see here is from the Crusader period. So if you think about the Crusades, think about 1500. That was only about 500 years ago or so. You know that almost anything that you see on this side of things, with especially these niched tops, come from a Crusader period. Now the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall, that's on the other side of this, on the other side of the Temple Mount. The Western Wall is a place where you can still see the Herodian stones. Also the Southern Steps, you can still see the Herodian stones that are there from the time of Jesus. But why would, in Muslim tradition, as well as, in Jewish and Christian tradition, depending on your eschatology, that means your view of end times, and there's about 4 major views, Messiah is going to come back to Jerusalem and rule. So if he does, he's going to have to enter the city, and this is probably the candidate where he would supposedly be able to enter. Well, the Muslims said if there's any Jewish or Christian Messiah going to come in here and rule in Jerusalem, he's not walking through that gate. So they blocked it up, and they put a cemetery in front of it so he would be defiled. They did everything that they could possibly do to ensure that some Messiah doesn't walk through that gate. I don't think that's going to stop Christ, but nevertheless, depending on your eschatology, you can wrestle with that one. Nevertheless, it's interesting to see how these things work. Major archaeological discoveries have been made around here, by the way. There was a man walking through here one day, and all of a sudden, boom, right through the ground. And they found some ancient burial places that had some really neat finds. But these are called, if you go to the southern side of the temple, these are called the southern steps of the temple. And what you're looking up are, some of these are Herodian stones. Some of these are Herodian steps, but not all of them. Some of them have been recreated because they've worn away over time. This is where Jesus and the disciples would have come, and they would have come from the southern side. This is where the commoners came into the temple. And what you can't see here is right over here there were 3 big doors. And some of these are Herodian stones. but that means from the time of Jesus. But they would have walked through gates here, right around the corner here, that would have been over in this area. You would have this big arch, a staircase would have came up and over and into the temple. It's called Robinson's Arch. Some of you have been there and seen that. But it's really neat to go here and sit for just a few minutes, because traditionally, a lot of different rabbis, not just Jesus, but other rabbis would sit on these steps and teach their disciples, and people would come. It's very, very interesting when you approach the southern steps. Those steps are all staggered. So in other words, you can't just walk in a steady stream up, or in a steady stride up the steps. You'll walk up one, and then the next one will be real short, and you're constantly watching your steps. Well, that's neat, because that's by design. Because when you approach God, as you go up to that holy temple, where it used to be at least, when you go up, you always have to contemplate your steps. It's kind of like what we do before communion. When we talk about getting and preparing our hearts and minds, that was a part of that for them. And to prepare their hearts, it started at the door. So you would contemplate your steps. I am going before the Lord. You don't just walk up in stride. You remember too, that's that whole paradigm of being pure and holy before God. You remember inside these doors at the temple, they would have a ramp that went up to the altar. And that was specified in Torah, right? You remember that? You remember the ramp? You have this big altar, and there was a ramp. Well, why not steps? Why wouldn't you just have steps that go up the altar? Jewish tradition tells us. Actually, it's the Bible. No, the Bible tells us this. It's not tradition. It's in the Torah. Because if you walk up on steps, you're more likely to show more of your leg, your naked leg. So if you have a ramp, it's more steady, and you don't show your nakedness as you walk up a ramp as opposed to steps. That's how meticulous they were with maintaining purity and holiness in the temple. And you know something, when I see us in our worship service and I see elders say, we need to wait until everybody's seated and we need to approach God and we want to worship in a way that's respectful, I believe it. I think that is absolutely right on. We are going, in our worship, we go before a holy God who wants us to be separate, and He wants our full attention. And even going back, in our methods, my goodness, our methods are pretty lax compared to what they did in the temple overall. I think what we do is fine, but I just say that whole avenue of making sure that your worship is pure and holy is, I think it's right on for what God would expect of His holy, set-apart people. We could go on about that, but we'll move on. This is the Solomon's porch, and as you notice, did some studying in this last couple weeks. Jesus comes into the temple, and you pick up here in chapter 21, verse 12. There's a little bit of debate among scholars, and most people don't, if I say, do you remember the time Jesus cleansed the temple? Well, the question you should ask is which time, because He did it twice. And because you can't put these two together and call them the same event. He cleansed the temple twice. The Synoptic Gospels put it later in His ministry. John puts it earlier in His ministry. And you really, if you add up and you do all the study on it, you really can't justify that Jesus just did it once and John decided to take this major event and just take it out of order. And if you look at the events, if you look at the chronology, He did it twice. Mentioned once in the Synoptics, it's mentioned once in John in the earlier part of ministry. The Synoptics put the cleansing of the temple later. This is a great model. Of all the little drawings that I've seen, this is probably the best representation of what it would have looked like where Jesus would have cleansed the temple. Because this is a view from within what they call the royal stoa. These are 40 feet high. They're made of one singular monolithic pillar that was made in some faraway place. It was amazing. There was like 160 of these or so that surrounded the temple. Amazing structure, gold-leafed roof, the whole 9 yards. And this is where they would have bought and sold. And it was a service-oriented place for some, because if you came, say, from Jericho, and you didn't want to haul a lamb all the way from Jericho, you could have purchased one here. And the problem is that in the Jewish literature tells us that in this time, if there was corruption among the Sadducees and the leaders of the temple. So what they would do is say, Joe's family, Joe's husband or son, would have brought a lamb. The priest would have inspected it for perfection, and he would say, "I'm sorry, I cannot certify your lamb. Your lamb has this tiny little defect that wouldn't really count as a defect, wink, wink, but no problem, because I can see her jewelry. She has money. Her family has money. So she can just go buy one. She can just buy one from us, and guess what? It's twice the price. Okay, it's like going to an amusement park. Sorry, I just using an example. Thanks, Joe. But that's the way they would have thought, though. It's like buying a soda at an amusement park. It's $4. A slice of pizza will cost you 10. It's highway robbery, but they got you. Same way here. And Jesus goes in here twice and says, "You have turned my Father's house into a den of robbers." And in Mark, the book of Mark says one thing that's unique in this whole situation. He adds something at the very end, and he says to the people, "My Father's house," and this is from Isaiah, as I recall, but he says, my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations." So in other words, this was not just Jews in here. As a matter of fact, when you come in to the temple, if you can see the temple, the main temple, if you see this little area right here, there's a balustrade, there's a wall that goes right through here, as you can see. Jews could only go past there. Gentiles could not under any circumstance. And I think I've showed you some stones that they've even found from the temple. There's about 2 of them that exist. There used to be about 12. And now there are only 2. One of them's in the Archaeological Museum in Istanbul. But you can, so even non-Jews could come to the temple, approach God, and be able to have prayer, to be able to somewhat commune with the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, even though you were not Jewish. And then Jesus clears the temple, obviously. And the night of Jesus's, after he goes through, you can read from chapter 21, and we're going to go through the parables, or many of them, in this class. It's going to happen probably June, I think, because we're going to take a break in the month of April. We have another curriculum to go through, and we'll pick up in June sometime, I think. But as we go through, Jesus goes to the Garden of Gethsemane, okay? And he does the Olivet Discourse, 24, 25, 26, there's a plot against Jesus, and then they go, he's anointed at Bethany. We're in 26, Judas agrees, Lord's Supper, verse 17, chapter 26, and then Gethsemane. Okay, so then Jesus went to verse 36 of chapter 26. 36 of chapter 26 says, "Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane." Stop. Okay, Isaiah represents Jesus as a shoot that will come from where? Stump of David, stump of Jesse will come from David. That's an olive shoot. It's like if you cut an olive tree down to the roots, shoots will come up. If a tree doesn't bear fruit, even to this day, you chop an olive tree off because it overgrows, and then it will grow shoots back, and you will have optimum fruit in the next seasons. Well, that's what happened proverbially with this. Jesus was that shoot, and lots of other expressions of olive oil in the. Even if you go back to the temple, or you go back to the early temple and even the tabernacle, the oil that they would burn inside of the tabernacle to light the inside of God's holy place. Remember that? It had to be 100% pure virgin olive oil. Had to be from the first press. Had to be the purest. And there that again, all these, you can go through the Old Testament and see all these assertions of the role of the olive in society, all the metaphors, and then here Jesus come, the root that comes from the stump of Jesse, the shoot that comes from the son of Jesse. Jesus goes to live in Nazareth. Nazareth, Nazar, it's the root there, same root, means the place of the shoot. So how perfect that the shoot that comes from the stump of Jesse goes to live in Nazareth, the place of the olive shoot. Isn't that something? He goes to live in Shootville. Amazing. Born in Bethlehem, house of bread. So the bread of life is born in a bakery in Bethlehem, and then he goes to live in the place of the shoot. These olive trees, if you go to, this is the Garden of Gethsemane today. It's a hard place to describe because it's kind of become a tourist attraction, obviously. And anytime that happens, you lose the kind of the rustic look of what it probably used to look like. If you're going to study the Gethsemane in the first version, or in the first century, you would go to you'd go to a place on Mount Carmel. It looks ancient, and hasn't been completely commercialized. Oh, by the way, Gethsemane. You know what? You know why he goes to the Garden of Gethsemane? I'm just trying to give you some review, and then I almost forgot the main point. Why the Garden of Gethsemane? Gethsemane means what? Anybody remember from our other classes? The Garden of the Olive Press. Okay, this is the Garden of the Olive Press. So here you have the shoot that comes from the stump of Jesse. Here you have Jesus going to live in Shootville, and then finally here you see him going to the Garden of the Olive Press, which the Scripture tells us that he was under so much stress, so much turmoil. What happened to him? He sweat. That is a metaphor, by the way. I think he did. I think it happens exactly as it said. But that is also a metaphor that he is under. His blood is going to come out. His pure blood is going to cleanse the whole world of those who believe in him. And that stress was squeezing that out of him. It is a metaphor beyond, it has to be. There's more that we could say about the Garden of Gethsemane, but we don't have time. So it's beautiful. Some of these olive trees go back to the time of Christ, if you can believe that. As a matter of fact, the day that you really want to go is the day that they trim the tree. I was there once, and I saw it that they were trimming the trees, and it's the priests that do it. It's the Catholics run this today. And you want to go when they cut it, because everybody swarms around the people who are cutting the trees, so that people can take a little little twig from a tree at the Garden of Gethsemane to take home and put in their scrapbook. It's really neat to be able to see people kind of scrambling to do that. I think they're all too cheap to buy souvenirs like me, but nevertheless, it's really neat to see. This is probably what it would have looked like. This is, I won't tell you where this comes from because I don't want to pull away from but this is probably what it looked like. It was dark. Remember, they had to have torches when they come, and they couldn't even see. They came across Jesus' screen and says, "Where's Jesus?" And it had to be Judas who identified him, who kissed him on the cheek. Why? Well, because when you look and see how dark it was, they didn't have street lights. They didn't have flashlights. They had torches. And so this is probably what it would have looked like for the disciples to watch Jesus praying at a distance. And you see the olive trees here. You see the olive trees. You see the shoots that come up. It was very rustic. Would have looked very much like that. And by the way, Exodus 12:42. Oh goodness, time's just moving by. Exodus 12:42, can't leave this out. Exodus 12:42, if you want to look at that, this is the night before God implements the 10th plague on the Israelites. He says, "I am about to work. After this, you're going to be freed. You're going to be let go from Egypt. And you're going to stay up all night. You're going to have this Passover meal, and then you're going to keep a watch all night." Because you remember what happened that night, right? You could hear the Egyptians wailing in the distance. Anybody who hadn't covered their house in the lamb's blood had their firstborn die, not only of the humans, but of the beasts and the animals as well. And God says, "Watch me work. Don't go to sleep this night. You stay up and keep a watch." Well, when Jesus goes to the Garden of Gethsemane, what does he tell his disciples to do? Stay up and do what? Keep watch. Leil Shemarim is something that Jews celebrate to this day. Leil Shemarim means the night of watching. The night of watching.
And that's tied to the Passover?
Absolutely. It goes all the way back. Exodus 12:42. The context of Leil Shemarim is in the context of the night of the Passover. It's the watch that you keep after the meal. And then we see Jesus on the real Passover. He had celebrated Passover on the Galilean calendar, which was the night before. And he also did that so he could actually be the Passover lamb on Friday. So we see Leil Shemarim. You can look that up if you want. You'll still see it. It's out there. There's different spellings of the word Leil, but that'll get you what you need if you want to study it further. Golgotha, always got about 3 minutes. I'm going to go past this. It's really hard. You can see why they call it the place of the skull, but I'll tell you, as much as geography changes over 2,000 years, I would not depend on that one bit. Let me take you to the interesting place, which is this place. It's the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. There's two places that people believe that Jesus died and was buried and resurrected. Two places. One is called Gordon's Tomb. It's called the Garden Tomb. And there's another place called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. By far, the evidence points to the Catholic site. Catholics control this. And when I say Catholics, it's really amazing because there's 4 church groups that claim ownership or claim control of this building. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre. 4 different Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, Roman Catholic, Coptic, and one other I can't remember offhand. And all 4 of them can't get along. Not too many years ago, there was a fight that broke out among the priests because they couldn't decide which part of the floor to sweep or something like that. Really, really sad that in the place that held up where Jesus died, people can't get along. Even the Christians, calling themselves Christians, can't get along there to manage this location. Really sad. This building was built by Constantine's mother. Remember her name? Her name was Helena. And it was built in about 325. If you remember, Constantine made Christianity legal in about 315 or so. And then 325, Helena, his mother, went on a tour of the Holy Land, and she identified all these sites where Christ supposedly had been and some of the key locations. And then they built churches over them. Oh, there's so much more to say about this. When you walk in the door, this is the stone of anointing. This stone has only been there for 400 years, but they say this is in this location. They moved it there about 400 years ago. Still pretty cool to know that stone was sitting there before George Washington, isn't it? That's yesterday in this history. But this stone essentially was the stone when Jesus was taken off the cross, laid down and wrapped and anointed and cleaned before he was put into the tomb. They say that's where it is. And to go there today and see people come in and kiss it, touch it, it's really neat to see all these people from different parts of the world come in there and just and want to be somewhat a part of that. This place here is at the top. It's inside the church, but you'll see here this little place right here. That's supposedly where the cross stood, and then you'll see right through here through glass is actually the top of Golgotha. Golgotha is Greek, Calvary is Latin, so they both mean the same thing, the place of the skull, and that's where the cross is. People will come here. I was fortunate. I don't think this is my picture. I've got one just like it, but people come in and they kiss that. There's a line usually to come in. People bow down before that. They touch it. They kiss it. They do whatever. I couldn't do that. I'm not going to appear to. I don't think they were worshiping the rock, but I just had funny feelings about that. I worship. It's not the place, it's the person. So, but nevertheless, I'm not putting people down who do that. But nevertheless, people will do that, and it's a place, and all kinds of humanity go there. Absolutely amazing place to see these people from all parts of the world. When you read in the Acts about where all the people came from to worship God at the temple, all these different regions, you get that at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre because you see people from all over. And this is the tomb. It didn't look anything like this. As a matter of fact, time's up, but this used to be a cave. They whacked the cave down around this, and then they built this whole structure over it. And if you go in, it's hard to get in there. I've only been able to walk in there once because the lines are usually pretty long. You go in there, and this is supposedly where Jesus had his head laying there. So this is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Again, it wouldn't have looked anything like this if you would have gone. Gordon's Calvary probably, Gordon's tomb looks a little bit probably more like what it really was, and this is what it looks like today, and it goes through the whole kind of the configuration of how those first century tombs were laid out. I hope that was helpful. I hope you found that interesting as you consider your Resurrection Sunday. Let's close with a prayer. Lord, thank you for today. And Lord, thank you for the reality. All these places, Lord, are not just meant to be a tourist attraction. They're meant to show us that you're real, that you've been here, that you walked this earth, that you died. And they're an evidence to us, to encourage us, to make us look forward to being with you, and to be grateful for you being our God. It's in Christ's name we pray today. Amen.
I was up on my phone and watching TV.